This video will talk about risk and reward. A lot of people or a lot of drivers like to play it safe, and they're pretty much company drivers. Company drivers, long-term company drivers, prefer safe. They don't like, they find a lot of comfort and safety and being an employee rather than being a small business owner. Not that they couldn't be a small business owner, it's just that they prefer to be an employee. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of company drivers who are very successful. And it meets all their needs. They in their viewpoint, they don't have a lot of incentive to take on that risk. But I will tell you, without risk, there would be no reward. So you got to be a little bit of a gambler to be an owner operator. A little bit of renegade, the kind of person that resists authority, that is a nonconformist. These are the types of people that are going to be attracted to the owner operator, independent contractor, small business, uh, business. What they prefer. They prefer to take risk, whereas company driver may not like the risk. Uh, Owner operators do. So this is kind of a characteristic that defines what's the difference between an owner operator and a company driver. An owner operator is a little bit of a gambler, a little bit of a renegade. A company driver prefers the safety and comfort of the corporation and takes less risks. Which one's right or wrong? It's just a matter of personal preference. There's no right or wrong answer to that question. So I often tell people, whatever works for you. People get hung up on other people's choices. Like one guy says he likes a Freightliner, another guy says he's stupid, he should be driving a Peterbilt. Well, not really. It's just a matter of personal preference. Who's right or who's wrong? Who cares? That's kind of the way it is with a company driver versus owner operator. Who's right? Who's wrong? Or who cares? So some people like being an owner operator, and others, prefer being a company driver. Personally, myself, I could never tolerate being a company driver. I was drawn to being an owner operator from the very beginning. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that if I was going to stay in trucking long term as a career, that I was going to have to buy my own truck and become an owner operator. And I would say there's some things that tend to have drivers drawn towards the owner operator business model. It's like if you have business skills, you may want to have your own small business. A lot of drivers have or even business classes under their belt. So for them to make that transition is very natural. Other drivers don't have any business skills, um, and it would be very difficult for them to run a small business, and they would probably be better off staying as a company driver. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But get to the point of no risk, no reward. You have to take chances if you want to grow. As a driver, as a small business owner, you got to take chances, and the outcome is not guaranteed. So this is the idea that without risk, you're not going to realize the rewards that come with it. And if you're going to play it safe, then you're going to limit your opportunities. When I look at the stock market, for example, there's some stocks that I really like that I recommend to a lot of my friends who are owner operators. It's basic stuff, but I would recommend Berkshire Hathaway B shares, and I would recommend an ETF called QQQM, which is a growth fund ETF, and I would recommend S&P 500 like Charles Schwab. And invest your money, grow your money. And you're like, well, why do you need to invest? Well, if you if you don't take the risk of investing, you're not going to grow your money. I mean, you could work hard and just maintain status quo. But if you take a little bit of risk, you can grow your investment. You can grow your money. You can uh, have a brighter future. Investing is long-term growth. And these three stocks I just recommended typically get over 20% return annually. That's more than what you're going to get in any kind of wage increase or and return on any kind of checking or savings account. Even a high yield savings account is only like 4%. So here we see another example of no risk, no reward. You got to be willing to risk some of your money by putting it in investments in order to get the reward, which is higher return. Same thing with being an owner operator versus a company driver. You got to be willing to take on a little bit of risk in order to get higher return. So you know nothing is guaranteed. The success is not guaranteed. You if you want 100% certainty, then you would want to be a company driver. But this is the idea of no risk, no reward. And you got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to be willing to make sacrifices. If you want to make, for example, at least $100,000 a year as a driver, then there's certain sacrifices you're going to have to make in order to make that happen. So it's not going to come to you, easily. You're going to have to work for it. But you can get there. Absolutely. But does that's going to require commitment. And a lot of people don't want to make that type of commitment. And you hear people say trucking's not worth it, or it's a job of last resort, or all the criticisms that comes with the trucking career. But for the right type of person, they can find a way to make it work. But not everybody is willing to take on the risk or make the sacrifices. Some people prefer the status quo and the security that comes with being a company driver. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with staying as a company driver. But for some people, you know, owner operator is a better fit. I knew from the very beginning. I knew, within the first year of driving truck that I wanted to buy my own truck and be a small business owner. So there's no doubt in my mind, what kind of driver I wanted to be. Other people come to it later. They kick it around for years and years and years, and they finally, decide to buy a truck. But that's okay. But just keep in mind a fundamental principle is no risk, no reward. Nothing held, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So if you want to reach higher and higher levels, you got to be willing to take on higher and higher risk. And that's just how it works. So if you don't like that, then it's probably not for you. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.